Yeah, baby. I love that too.
How are you, young boy?
I'm doing good. You, bud?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm doing well.
Good, good. I've just about had it though, man. I got to tell you, I'll be honest with you. I want to break out. I want to break out of this cage. Hi, everybody.
We're talking to our web guy the other day, saying the same thing for Sean.
I keep forgetting we have people with us. Very special show today. You know, Fridays are usually guest days, or at least days where we will key in on a certain subject or person. And last week, it was Big Brother Reno. That was a great episode. Nice to see him again and get back with him. This week, we are going to bring another very special guest into the program, and we might as well do it right from the top. And that's right, Calvin. The doc is in the house. I'm going to bring in Gord Pyzer, who, of course, is the doc on Outdoor Journal Radio every Saturday morning on the Fan 590 on our program there. He is an award-winning writer and fishing editor of Outdoor Canada magazine, a member of the Canadian Angler Hall of Fame. He is, in his previous life, we're going to talk about this on the program today, he was a senior manager with the MNR, obviously involved in fisheries a lot, and just one of the most knowledgeable guys in the business, probably considered the most scientific angler on the planet. Let's bring him in now, our good friend, Gord Pyzer. Gordy, are you there? There he is.
I'm here.
How are you, buddy?
You know, in my wildest dreams, when we first started doing this back in the, 50s, 60s, who would have thought we would be doing this today?
It's very cool, man. It's true.
Very cool.
Hey, in the 50s, easy, boys, okay? Come on now, easy. But I'm close. I'm very close. How are you, Gord?
I'm doing great, Pete. How about you?
Doing well, bud. Doing very, very well.
Considering, right? You might not know, Gordy is up in Kenora, Ontario, up there in God's country. Enjoys fishing pretty much every day, because every Saturday when I talk to him live on the radio program, he's either going or coming from fishing. So I'm assuming it's every day.
Yeah.
How are you in that in between stage now, Gordon? Or the ice is gone?
The ice is gone, but interestingly, Ange, I can see Lake of the Woods right out my side window here. That's how close one of the boat ramps is. But Liam and I on today's Friday, so Wednesday, we went north, about an hour north of Kenora. Beautiful, beautiful day. When we got to the lake, trout lake we were going to, there was still about 1 inch of ice on it.
Wow.
And so we had to turn and come back south a bit. But we found a lake that was, most of the lakes are wide open right now. Lake of the Woods is wide open. The trout lakes hold the heat or hold the cold much longer. So they're the last ones to go out. But we were ice fishing, I hate to say this, or open water fishing for lake trout 48 hours ago.
Wow.
I had lake trout for dinner last night.
When you encounter a half inch ice, let's say the lake is skimmed over and you get the boat with you, do you ever just go out, break it up at the launch, and then just drive your boat on top and smash it up?
It's a great question, Pete, because yes, we actually took the big boat out about 10 days ago. And we did that on a couple of spots. Lake of the Woods was probably 95% open. We wanted to get to a couple areas, so we kind of used the boat as a bit of an icebreaker and went through. But I'll tell you this: the biggest muskies I've ever caught in my life. We used the little boat. I had the big boat in the garage winterized, and we had the little boat, and we actually broke ice for probably 200, 300 yards breaking ice to get out to the open water. And I caught a 57.5-pound muskie, my personal best ever. And we probably broke ice for an hour or half hour to get out.
Wow. That's huge.
Amazing. That is amazing. Right on. What's an adventure?
Just remind folks that if they want to ask something specific, put it up on the screen, and Stephen, our techie, will focus on it and put it up on the screen in front of us, and we'll read it out and see if Gord's got an answer. Try and stump Gord. I think that would be the best thing to do today.
Yeah.
Wow.
This is the opportunity, though, with all three of us here. If folks have questions,
For sure.
absolutely. I got a bunch of stuff here. I got some musky rods here, and I got some wireline, lead core outfit here. And so, try and stump us.
All right. Before we get into any of that, I know, Pete, you got a little stump. We'll call it stump.
I got a little list made up of about 5 or 6 questions that I'll lay on the Gord and Angelo. Actually, it's just kind of a new little thing. I got an idea, so we'll do that later on too. But it'll be kind of fun.
So, Gord, first of all, I wanted to talk about something that I think is worth mentioning right now. During this pandemic and during this, lockdown period that we're facing, it still is safe to go out fishing, but we do have to adhere to the guidelines. And I think what you shared with me on Outdoor Journal Radio about 3 weeks ago on how you and Liam, your grandson, go fishing just blew me away. And it is so bang on. I think we need to mention it here today, how you and Liam get to your fishing spots.
It's one of those things, Angie, I never would have thought this was. I mean, it's crazy. He's a really good kid, I'll say that first. And so he's been totally social distancing himself for, I think it's 6 weeks now, or 6-7 weeks. So I gave him my old half-ton truck on his 17th birthday. We had it in the house here, and I threw him the keys. I promised him since he was a little kid, he was so in love with that truck. So he's got his own half-ton. And what we do, he follows me. So I'll have the boat and I'll be trailering. He follows me in his truck. We get to the site, and on the weekend or on Wednesday when we went trout fishing, one of us will decide who's handling the rope to put the boat in and who's going to drive for the day. And you know what? We actually took the smaller tiller boat, and he's a great back troller, and he wanted to really get on. So, one of us, he was back trolling and then fishing vertically, and I was casting. But I said, you run the boat. I will not touch the handle all day. We stayed probably 10, 12 feet apart. He brought his camera. I brought my camera. We never touched it. And, it's hard.
Yeah.
But you know what? Look at that. There he is. He's been in love with that truck.
That's awesome.
And now he owns it. Now that's his.
Fantastic.
And he's a little taller, isn't he, Gord, now?
Pardon me?
He's a little bigger than that as well now, isn't he?
Oh, yeah.
I do this, Pete, when he's about 6'1", 155, 160 pounds. He does all the heavy lifting.
That's awesome, buddy. Good stuff.
I wanted to bring that up because I thought it was just such a beautiful story, and obviously spending every Saturday with Gord on the radio show, I get to hear the stories about him and Liam fishing, and one of the concerns I had was what's going to happen with Gord and Liam through this pandemic, and man, it was so refreshing to hear how you guys are dealing with it. It's great, man.
I see a fella just put a good question up here about lake trout, but before we answer that, and the very last lake trout trip that we went for ice fishing, I had 20 feet of rope. I was on my quad. I had 20 feet of rope, and he was on a sled inside the sled, and I pulled him across the lake. He drilled all the holes. It's hard to do, but it's not impossible to do. And we can live within the rules and be smart about it. And that's, obviously we're lucky enough up here in Kenora. There's so many lakes. We never saw another person on Wednesday. So it's doable, and you can live within the rules and do it well.
Guys, I read a post yesterday. It's funny we're talking about this, and I don't know. I mean, obviously, it's the internet. There could be as much crap as there is truth out there. And there was a group of 5 guys that went trout fishing on a creek in the southern Ontario, somewhere, I think in the south, I think. got there, the police questioned them about why did they not all drive together in the same truck, because it would have alleviated all the vehicles parking along the road. And they said, well, we're social distancing. We're trying to do our best social distancing. No, we would have preferred you to be all in the same truck going down.
Oh, I
There's
find
not-
that's awful advice.
No, I mean, I know how true it is, but think about that. Now, there is groups of five, they say groups of five or less. There's so much gray area in all this. And who knows, I mean, if it's a true story or not, but that's just one I read yesterday. I thought, what the hell is that?
Oh.
If I was a betting man, I would bet that that's not a true story. I can't see any officer in any police force, any part of this province that would advocate driving five guys driving together in a vehicle. Unless they were all living together in one house, then that's
they weren't. They drove 5 vehicles, right? That's why they said they drove 5 vehicles, because they didn't live together. So
it's interesting too. I watched one of the epidemiologists on the news the other night, and someone wrote in that question: is it safe? Can we social distance with 2 people in a car? And the epidemiologist said, well, maybe if one's in the trunk.
I love it.
I did too.
Oh, that's awesome.
There's a couple of let's go to a couple of questions at the here we go. Tim Sturgeon wants to know best weight to get down 30 feet on a shield bike. There you go. And you know a thing or two about that, Gord.
I do.
I want to interrupt for a second. Gordy, I need you to, I'm going to do this right on the air because this is all fun and live. I need you to shift a bit. Yeah, right there, buddy, because I want to see that beautiful face in full, okay? I love that. That's better. Thank you.
That's a face made for radio.
Right.
Question, Gord. Go ahead.
Okay, Tim's question's a really good one. I mean, there's so many ways. And here's something else. Liam and I have this discussion all the time. Anglers tend to overcomplicate things. And we think there's only one answer to every question or problem. There's usually 5, 6, 7 answers to it, and they're all good. So you try and meld the answer that fits in best with the tackle you own and what you can afford. So down 30 feet. The most precise way, let's say we were trolling for lake trout, the most precise way is a cannonball on a downrigger. If you don't have a cannonball and you don't have a downrigger and you're fishing for trout, then probably the next best way, if you're trolling, would be a bottom bouncer. Now, the solution for bottom bouncers, whether you're fishing for walleye, pike, lake trout, does not matter. 10 feet, 1 ounce. 20 feet, 2 ounce, 30 feet, 3 ounce. So if you want to get down 30 feet, a 3 ounce, 3.5 ounce bottom bouncer is ideal. Now I've got here, and this is so, underused. And this is a wireline lead core outfit. And lead core is absolutely amazing stuff. Lead core, the really cool thing about trolling lead core, you have nothing in front of your lure. So cannonballs sometimes spook trout, bottom bouncers will spook fish sometimes. When you use lead core, especially lead core with a long leader and a long fluorocarbon, there's nothing. And now here's what's really cool. I can take a little tiny lure that might go down 5 feet. I can put that at 30 feet. I can put it at 35 or 40. So lead core is absolutely amazing stuff. And it's amazing for walleye, for smallmouth, for lake trout, every fish that's out there. It's probably the most underused technique for walleye. Now, here's the secret with lead core. Lead core comes in different colors. So every 30 feet, every 10 yards is a different color. So when I look at my reel here, it starts off, I think you can see that. You can see the different colors in there. So there's red, there's blue, there's green. And the neat thing is with lead core, every 30 feet. Now, here's the secret. I never knew why when I was a kid in elementary school ends at 3:20 in the afternoon. Why didn't it end at 3:30? But anyway, it ended at 3:20 with lead core line. When you let out 3 colors, you go down 20 feet as a general rule. So I always remember, I'll never forget because of elementary school, 3 colors, 20 feet deep. Every color you let out after that goes down generally 5 feet more. So if you let out 2 more colors, 320 plus 10, now I'm down 30 feet, 40 feet. And you do that because it comes with 10 different colors. Now you can take a bait that only a little tiny crankbait that might only go down 2 feet. I can put that in front of a walleye in 32 feet of water, and it has never seen it before. It is such a deadly technique. It's absolutely amazing.
How about visibility, though, Gord? I mean, we're always, all of us are paranoid about visibility of our line to the fish and spooking the fish with it. I remember I haven't used. I'll be honest with you, I haven't used lead core for 20 years, 25, maybe 30 years, and one of the reasons I got away from it was exactly that, spooking the fish. How do you feel about that?
Put on a 20, 30-foot leader, Ange. If you're fishing in super, super clear water, put on my buddy Mark Steffel. I hope Mark's watching right now. I sent him an email this morning. Mark is probably the best wire line or lead core liner I know. He will put a 100-foot fluorocarbon leader afterwards, and he will troll, believe it or not, in 5 feet of water in the spring. And the cool thing about lead core follows your boat. So if you're out maybe on a 15 or 20 or 25-foot contour, and maybe it's an underwater point that runs out, as you follow the contour with your sonar, lead core line follows the boat. Monofilament and fluorocarbon, it cuts across. So if you weave out and then make a sharp turn, your fluorocarbon and mono will cut across the shoal. Lead core follows the boat. And that's one of the great advantages. Another buddy of mine, John Butts. John is only the 2nd Canadian ever to win a PWT tournament. Lead core is his go-to for walleye. And it is just such an amazing technique. It's just such an amazing technique.
Oh, price of admission. Just
I got to ask him a question. So that's great. When you're lead core, you're getting your numbers down and your depths down. What if then you put on a 20-foot deep diving walleye crankbait? How much extra depth are you going to get with a diving crankbait, or can you get
really good question, Pete? Because I'll be honest with you, I don't use a very long leader.
Right.
And John doesn't either. We use leaders that are maybe 10 feet deep. So it has no impact on it, no matter what lure, because what you do is think, how deep will that lure run from the end of your lead core? Your lead core is now the surface of the lake, if you will. But if you're like Mark and say you put on a 100-foot leader, so you put on a 100-foot monofilament leader, then it will dive as deep as your lure normally would from 100 feet out. And so if it goes down 10 feet, then you could add 10 feet on to what you know your lead core is going. And that's how you fine tune them. And it's a great question, Pete, because you'll play with those sorts of things. The other thing I would say about lead core is extremely speed dependent. So if you go slow, it falls quite quickly. If you speed up, it will actually lift fairly quickly. So what I always say to folks is, if you can, find a bay, maybe the bay, 20-foot sand bay or a 40-foot sand bay, let out your line and then just keep feeling until, now I feel I'm hitting bottom, and then look at how many colors you have out. Or we always use line counter reels, and you look at your line counter and it'll say, I got 94 feet of line out. You now know, when I let 94 feet of line out at the speed I'm going to troll all day today, I'm banging bottom in 32 feet of water. Game on.
Yep.
You've got no stretch in that line either, which is something else that we need to let people in on, right? Whatever you are normally setting your drag at, whatever you normally use for a rod, whatever you normally use for a hook set, all that stuff is out the window with lead core line.
Now, I know my grandson's watching this, Ange, and we were out for trout the other day, and he had it tightened down, and he set wicked, snapped the lure right off this line. With lead core, you got to back it off. Because exactly, and lead core, believe it or not, all the line is normal braided line. It's non-stretch braided line with lead going down the core of it. And so if it says 17-pound test, it's 17-pound test. Just because it looks strong, it's still only 17. The other really key thing is you can get it, say, in 27-pound or 15-pound. And a lot of people think the 27-pound test goes deeper faster. It's the opposite. It actually rises up. It's the line strength that's 27. There's no more lead in your line. So it's a thicker diameter. And so it sinks, actually, it's more buoyant, even though it's stronger line. So if you want to go deeper faster, you actually use the lower stretch because it's lower diameter, and it'll go down faster. But it's a great technique. And I saw someone, I guess it was Brad, he was asking, oh, wow, a great question there too. But he was asking about dipsy divers and lead core. Dipsies are also not used very often, especially by guys up in my neck of the woods. Used much more down by you. But dipsies and jet divers, they can be great, especially for salmon, lake trout. Really, really simple aid. And the size of them, you can rotate them to get them to swing out left or right. You can dial them in to go deep fast. And the key thing I would say about dipsy divers is for lake trout and salmon in particular, they actually add attraction. So you can get dipsies that are colored chartreuse and silver and whatever, and they take your bait out and they actually act as an attractor. A very, very simple way to get your baits down. You can dial them right in. Another little thing, you can go online, get an app, and it's called precision trolling, made by a fellow in the States. A couple of guys down there. It used to be the book form, and I still carry the book forms, but I've got the app as well. And any of your dipsy divers, depending on the size, you just open it up and it'll tell you, when I let out this amount of line, here's how deep my dipsy is. So get the app Precision Trolling. And dipsy, pardon me?
Mark Romanek, is that who that was? Or
yes, Mark. Yeah.
Yeah.
I could. He's a great friend. I can tell you how originally they did that, and some of the things they actually put a diver and this has got nothing to do with dipsies, but they put a diver down on the bottom of the lake, and then they trolled baits through, and they had a ruler sticking up on the bottom. But here's the thing: inadvertently, they would catch a number of walleyes. I mean, they weren't fishing. They were trying to put the depth curves together for each of the various lures. And they inadvertently often would catch walleyes. And they went back and took a look at the baits that they caught the walleyes on. And it was something like 90% had a rattle inside. What does that tell you?
All right.
I'll go a little bit, just let me do one little quick tip on, and Gord, you'd love this, but we did a show years ago on Lake Ontario with dipsies. Usually people want dipsies to go out away from the boat and deeper. It helps to do that. But we were fishing in maximum 12 feet of water, fishing lake trout on sand, and we were letting the dipsies dig into the sand. And they're ripping up this big, massive, like, it looked impossible for trout. And the lake trout were smashing spoons behind that. So we were using dipsies as a tool to dig up the sand and trail and attract the fish, and they come over. And then so there's things you can do with, abnormal things you can do too.
And Pete, we'll do the very same thing with cannonballs. We'll drop our cannonballs into the bottom, create that mud storm. And the other little trick, I actually won a tournament in Thunder Bay, and this was many, many years ago. I won it with my daughter, Jenny, and she was in elementary school. And we won this big lake trout tournament out on Lake Superior out of Thunder Bay. And we would be trolling, and I'd tilt my transducer so I could pick up my cannonballs. So if you just tilt your transducers back, you'll see your and we could see our lures coming behind. And I was actually using, honest truth, I was using the jointed floating Rapalas. We'd see the lake trout. We'd see the lake trout come right up behind our cannonballs and follow. And it became notorious. It actually got called the Pyzer pop-off in Thunder Bay. When we saw that happen, I'd run to the back of the boat. I'd snap my lure. I put it in neutral. I'd snap my line off the cannonball and just let the Rapala float up to this. And the lake trout would knit. We won the tournament doing that. Every fish we saw came in behind and was following our bait. We'd pop it off and just let it automatically float up to the bottom in 80, 90 feet of water, and the trout just ate it.
Wow.
Oh, that's great. That's brilliant. I love that.
Wants to know, does or will the color, and you and I have talked about this on the radio show a number of times, will the color of the lure spook some of fish?
Now, I believe yes. I do believe yes, but some of the research, and Stephen Cook at Carleton University in Ottawa had a grad student do some work, and they actually used Senkos for wild largemouth, and they concluded that color did not matter. Now, I will say that color as a general rule is the least important thing ever. It's the last thing you ever have to worry about. But if you get depth control, if you've got your bait down on where the fish are and you're presenting it at the speed that they want it, so depth control is always the most important consideration. You got to be down or where the fish are. You've got to be presenting it at the speed they want it, then the size and profile of your bait. But if you get all of that dialed in well, I think color then can make a big fine-tuning difference. But it's never, ever the most important thing. And Al Lindner, Al's a really good friend. And Al used to come up and fish with me all the time. And Al used to chair or be the last day at the old PWT walleye tournaments. And he would be the MC for the last 10 anglers to come up. And Al used to tell me it was crazy. The third last guy would weigh in and say, and Al would say, "Man, what'd you catch him on?" And the guy'd say, "I spent all of practice. I used every spinner in the box. If you didn't have purple on, you wouldn't get a bite." And then the second place guy'd get up and say, "Man, I used every jig in practice. If it wasn't sharp, if it wasn't orange, I could." I mean, every guy, we become self-fulfilling prophets.
I got a quick theory about that. I'm in the middle of writing a blog. It's almost finished, and it has everything to do with what you just said. And I find what you just said fascinating. And the answer to that little puzzle is confidence. Each one of those anglers was confident that that color was the winning color that day. And you've talked to enough pros yourself, Gord, to know that confidence is everything. And they're all going to tell you they're the winner. And that's why you could talk to one guy and orange is his color, the other guy's black, and the other guy's purple, the other guy's green, chartreuse, and yellow. And it's confidence. Those guys are using those colors with full confidence, knowing that they're going to catch fish with it. And you know what? They do.
And this will blow your mind. I hate blue. I cannot catch walleye if there's blue on my lure, I will not put it on. I cannot catch a fish. And yet I guarantee guys are going to start coming in here saying a blue back herring or a blue color lure is my all-time. I cannot get bit on blue. I don't put it on. Yeah. And I used to go down and cover the Bassmaster Classic, and I used to spend time with Kevin Van Dam and Ricky Clunn and those guys. And I always remember George Cochran, and George won the Bassmaster Classic. And on the Friday before the Classic, they used to take the media out and have a mini Classic. And one of the media guys came up to George before the tournament, and he said, "I'm going out on the media day tomorrow, George. Can you give me a little secret?" And George said, "Throw this or whatever. It's dynamite." And the guy went out. He won the media portion of the Classic. Afterwards, he said, George, here's all the scrums going on and thousands of people. And he said, George, I can't thank you enough. And someone said to George, what did you tell him? And George said, I don't have a clue what I told him, but whatever it was, I knew he'd go out and do it and have confidence in it.
That's it, man. That is it.
That's it. I'm glad both of you guys have brought this up, because I was going to ask this question out of the air today. And I was going to ask Gord and Ange, but I know Ange's thoughts on a lot of things too. So Gord, I'm going to throw a bait up here. The most natural looking jerk bait I have in the box. Where are we? So it's an X-Wrap, right? That natural black back. That bait right there, right? You guys see that, Gord? I cannot get bit on that color of that X-Wrap versus like the natural color. I can throw a pink like this. I can get bit. I can throw this guy and get bit. And I'm talking about different species of fish. But if I throw that natural, for some reason, I can't get bit on that, up to the point of I don't even throw it anymore. And this is a great bait. Everybody knows these X-Wraps are phenomenal for catching fish. What do you think that is, that the more natural this bait looks, the less I can catch on it? And now I don't even use it. What do you think about that?
I love X-Wraps. And the only one I ever throw, Pete, is that olive green back. And if you gave me any one of those others, I'd likely take sandpaper to it and repaint it with an olive back, because I don't have the confidence in those other colors either.
Really? So
I honestly don't.
That, to me, that's not the natural color. That looks like a minnow. Yet I get the least amount of fish on that color. I get the craziest colors. We'll get fish, but I can't get it on the natural. That one I can't figure out.
But here's the other thing. When you look at some, especially if you go down to California, where the hand pores are, and Huddleston is a great example, the Huddleston crayfish, and they're like $25, $30 a pack. I can catch more on a tube jig. And you tell me, what is a tube jig? Is the greatest smallmouth bass lure that has ever been made. Tube jig is the best crayfish imitation that's ever come along. But to us, we think, well, there's something that, an exact replica, but the fish want the tube.
Hey, I got a question for both of you guys, a little trivia question. What was the very first tube jig called?
G2 and G1?
No, he's got it. Pete's got it. Gets it.
Yeah, the G stands for,
Gets it.
But the other, now here's something for you. The one of the G's is also Guido, who made the Guido Hibden. Guido was a great friend. And I'll tell you a little secret, again, for walleyes. A tube jig is one of the greatest walleye baits ever made. So I'm in Winnipeg at the Mid-Canada Boat Show. I was there, and this was on the Saturday and Sunday, and it ran for about 5 days. Here's this giant, the big hog troughs. So they're tractor trailers. I'm up on top, and the hog troughs full of walleyes. So I've been doing seminars all week long. I mean, thousands and thousands of people come into the boat show, and all the kids are up against the glass, and the walleyes are. These things are spooked out of their minds. So they're down on the bottom, laying on the bottom. But as I was giving seminars on the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I'm getting bit every time I throw a tube jig out and laying it on the bottom because of depth control and speed control. So I'm down on the bottom and I'm leaving it there doing almost nothing. This is the honest truth. If anybody's watching from Winnipeg, they were there on the Sunday. I was getting bit so many times. I got up on the hog trough at the back doing my seminar, and I said, I'm going to make 4 casts. I'm going to catch 4 walleyes. And if I don't, I'll jump into the tank. I made 4 casts. Caught 4 walleyes. And you'll never know if I would have jumped in the tank.
We were talking about this the other day, Pete and I, about some of not that the tube is an old jig or an old bait by any means, but what reminded me of it was the talk about lead core, because at one time lead core was a staple for any angler. But it's funny how all of those old techniques and the old baits and presentations that used to catch fish like crazy, all of a sudden, at some point, we became too sophisticated to be using that stuff, and we put it on the shelf, never to be used again. But there was some great baits and some great techniques that if you bring them out today, they're fantastic.
Absolutely.
And they're every bit as good today.
Yep.
Yeah.
I swear, I went down writing stories for Outdoor Canada and fish. I used to fish the Bassmaster Top 100, and that was what is now the Elite Series. And that's when there was only one bass circuit in the U.S. in the 1990s. So Kevin was there, and all the best anglers were the top 100 at Bassmaster. And that's when it was pro-am. And I'd always go down and fish as an amateur at the back of the boat, and I'd get great story material. So the first one I ever went to was the Minnesota Top 100 at Lake Minnetonka. And I led it going into the final day. I finished third, won 10 grand, but I had a Ranger boat motor trailer going into the final day. But I caught every single fish on a jig worm. And now they call it a Ned rig.
Right.
Ned Cadies, Ned's one of my best buddies. Ned and I sometimes will email 5 times a day. He was 80 years old last week. But so the Ned rig's now the thing to do. Yeah. I almost won the Minnesota Top 100 in 1994 throwing a Ned rig. So yeah. anything we think is new is just a revised version of something that was older.
I want to talk about new moving forward. Before we do, Stephen, if you've got some questions there that you've been looking at on the side, feel free to put them up. We'll get through some of these now. What's a good speed for trolling for walleye? That's Don Mummery. Slow, fast, or both, Gord?
Well, there's a great question. The biggest mistake we all make for walleyes, 2 mistakes. Number one, we always assume they're on the bottom, and we always assume they're lazy. Here's a guarantee, absolute guarantee. I start off every day throwing, if I'm casting, and I know the question was trolling, but I start off every day casting usually half as a minimum, but usually 3/4 of an ounce. I'm throwing 3/4 of an ounce saltwater jigs, and I'm throwing them swim baits, 5 and 6 inch swim baits, and there's only one way you can fish that. Pop it, swim it, pop it, swim it. And our best day was 15 over 10 with a 15-pounder. Pete, first time I ever met Pete was on the Bay of Quinte at Merlin Park Resort, and we were filming an in-fisherman show, and that's how we caught every single fish. Always start every day assuming they're active and aggressive, and start off if you're trolling, troll quicker. If you have to finesse, if you have to slow down, then do it. But as a general rule, we start every day assuming the fish are aggressive. And you talked about confidence. One of the biggest and self-fulfilling prophecies. If you look out the window right now, there's no wind, blue sky, sunny. And if this was July, August, we'd go, ooh, it's going to be a tough walleye day. And so what do? We pick up a rod, 6-pound test line, a 1/16 of an ounce jig, and we put a little tiny minnow on. And we become a self-fulfilling prophet. It's tough. I started that day throwing a 3/4 ounce jig, and we haven't stopped all day long, and we're now heading towards 100 fish.
Yeah, it's true. That is so true, AP. You and I are guilty of that a lot of times. Of course, we're out shooting, so we're working, and time is of the essence, and we can't, in most cases, we can't take the chance, right, on aggressive fish. We know that, or we think we know that in most cases we will find those neutral fish or non-aggressive fish. So we go in starting with that, and you're bang on. Every time that we make switches, and one of us will say, well, okay, the hell with that. Let me try something a little more out of the box. you're right. You get a fish. I remember that story, or Pete, when you and I were up at Lodge 88 that one year, where you threw that big jig. We'd been doing okay with small uh, finesse type jigs, but Pete threw this big gaudy chunk right into shore, where you should not have caught a 10-pound walleye. And sure as heck, hey, that's a classic example of what Gord's talking about.
I'll say this, Ange. The guy who invented the absolute best swim bait heavy jig fisherman in the world is Doug Stange. Doug's a great friend. We shot so many shows together and fished together. When we started doing this in the 1990s, this is the honest truth. I thought, when this gets out, our walleye populations are in trouble. We're throwing 3/4 ounce jigs with 6-inch swim baits in 15 feet of water. I kid you not, we're getting 100 fish days, trophies galore. And then I go online and guys are going, oh, these, and people would say, that stuff might work up in Northwest Ontario. It won't work in my neck of the woods. We go down to the Bay of Quinte. We shot 5 years in a row on the Bay of Quinte in the fall, swimming heavy swim baits, 3/4 and 1 ounce swim baits, counting them down and swimming them in the fall when everyone's out with planer boards. Talk to Kevin Laver at Merlin Park Resort. We caught so many 10, 12, 14, 15 pound. It was crazy. And everybody's going, this might work up in your neck of the woods. And we go, oh, and then I realized you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink.
I'll give you and I know Gord and Angelo both agree with me, but I'll make a statement here that the walleye, to me, especially when they're relating to weed beds, weed walleye are the most aggressive predator in that whole weed bed. You're throwing crankbaits as an instance. We throw cast cranks a lot in the weed beds, and it is amazing the speed of walleye, the accuracy of walleye, the amount of walleye you catch. And if there's largemouth and walleye in that weed bed, those largemouth don't have a chance. Those walleye will beat to the crankbait every time. It's unbelievable how aggressive walleye are in certain instances. I mean, not always, but there's a lot more than people, really believe.
You and I learned that out of our tank, Pete. Remember the big aquarium where we had walleye and bass and pike and everything else, and weed lines, etc. And walleye by far the greatest predator of all those fish, by far, not even close. In terms of speed, in terms of like that healthiness, in terms of everything, they're king. They are king. So it makes sense. A great big 3/4 ounce jig with a nice big juicy fat swim bait behind it. Why not?
Yeah.
So the Cabela's walleye circuit, which has taken over from the PW, what do you think it got won on? Angler of the Year and the Classic last year. And what do you think everybody is touting now as the walleye technique of the century? What do you think it is? Throwing heavy jigs with swim baits. We've been doing it for 25 years. I was afraid our walleyes were in trouble when I saw Stange doing it originally. And the other thing I was going to say about Pete is so right about the weeds, Pete. And the one thing that folks forget about, there's another weed line up on top. Often the weeds don't grow right to the surface. And so we always fish that outside deep weed line. But if you use shallow, like the X-Wrap, and you fire when there's maybe 5 feet, 6 feet growing, the weeds on the coarthus haven't grown up maybe all the way yet, and you rip that, and just when you touch them, stop and let it rip them again. And when they hit, Pete, I guarantee folks are going to say, that can't be a walleye. That's got to be a muskie. Oh my God, it's a walleye.
Yep. And big ones too, right? The bigger fish.
Biggest
yeah.
one. We got a interesting question. Steve, you want to start putting some up? Feel free, buddy. There's all kinds of good ones there. Dean Talbot. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Have any of you fished north of Thunder Bay in the Armstrong area? And if so, what lakes? Also, have you ever fished for spring burbot? And if so, what did you use?
Gord Pyzer's a guy for that one.
You know, I was almost the district manager at Geraldton one time. I have fished in that the Nipigon area, Lake Nipigon. In fact, I lived in Thunder Bay, so Nipigon was kind of my home lake. But the spring burbot, wow, that is a stumper. I have never fished for burbot in the spring. I've never caught a burbot in open water.
Interesting.
Wow. There you go.
You have anything on that, Pete?
I am not a burbot guy. You know what I mean? I know they spawn under the ice. I heard that. I'm not sure if that's true or not, and that's why guys do so well on these humps when I think they're spawning or not. Is that true, Gordy? That's usually the concentration, the heaviest concentration of burbot. But
they spawn under the ice, Pete. They spawn in March, February, March, and we fish them when they're spawning, and it's great fun. And I saw Steve just posted a question there about Solunar tables, and phenomenal question. I'm going to tell you something. It's actually coming out in the summer edition of Outdoor Canada. Do you use Solunar tables? John writes as a guide. This will blow your mind. For 2 years now, and I've told no one this, Liam and I, for the past 2 years, every time we go out, we either look in advance or when we come home, what the prediction was. And it's blown my mind. I'm going to I got my iPad right here. There's a couple of blogs. There's lots of great apps on the tables. But one of the really good ones, I'll show you here right now. One of the good ones is Muskie Hunter TV. So there's the Muskie Hunter TV one. And what you see is the peaks. And today's peak is at 4:15 p.m. 4:15. It is uncanny. It is shocking. We know that for early in the morning bite is so good, and late in the evening, the last bite in the evening is good. What we've discovered, Liam and I, the past 2 years is if you raise a muskie during the day, and we do this all the time, you raise a big fish and immediately we pull away from it and we leave. It's unlikely you're going to get it fishing. All you're going to do is condition it for the next 10, 15 minutes after. Now, the tradition has been come back at last light, at the soonest sundown, right at last light, and cast for that fish. And that's a great strategy. I'll tell you right now, you go when today at 4:15, it's usually the moon rise is the peak. That has a huge influence on today's peak. You go at 4:15 today, it will be as good or better as dawn and dusk. It is just amazing. There's a whole bunch of apps. We've now started looking at them. And so the other thing, and imagine again in tournaments, and I wrote about this in the summer edition fishing column. So we were out fishing. You guys are down on Lake St. Francis fishing that bass tournament there. You got a great spot. You found this great spot. You know that the smallmouth are on it. My bet is that's where you run first thing opening day of the tournament. So day one, but what you forgot was maybe you caught them there at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And today the peak is at 4:15. Sometime go there at 4:15 on your number. Maybe we go to our number one spots first thing in the morning, and you shouldn't. Maybe that's the spot you want to go on today's peak. And we've started doing it. It will blow your mind some days how accurate it is.
We talked about that a couple of weeks ago on this show, Gord, about using aids, whether it's Solunar or just lunar tables, etc. And they are fantastic. I don't think people use them anywhere near enough. But I also threw it out there with a word of caution. Doesn't mean that you don't go fishing when they're not optimum. You know, we don't have options. We go fishing because we love to go fishing, and if that means I can take off 5 o'clock Friday afternoon after work and go fishing, but it's a time to be fishing according to the Solunar tables. Doesn't matter. Go fishing anyways, right? It's putting yourself in the perfect spot at the perfect time that's going to get you a trophy. But it's not the only time to be out there fishing. Let's be honest about it.
In fact, Ange, again, I wrote about it. The single best day of ice fishing for lake trout Liam and I have ever had in our life, the single best day I have personally ever had occurred this year. It was mid-February. It was on a day that it was predicted 13%. So the worst prediction of but I checked it before we went. And so here's the key point. I checked it before we went, and honest truth, I said to Liam, today's not the day to go exploring. It's a poor percentage. The fish are still going to eat. This is what folks, I think, forget. It's what the Solunar tables are telling you is activity level. So the activity level is going to be poor today. Don't go exploring. Don't go trying new baits. We went to our best spot on our best lake and used our best techniques and had the greatest day of lake. We put 13 on the ice, easily could have put 20, 22. We were pulling away from 4 or 5 fish chasing. And honest truth, halfway through the day, it was about 1 o'clock. I said the table has to be wrong. We not only went to new spots, we left the lake we were on, went across a portage, went to another lake, never got a bite, tried a bunch of other spots, came right back to our number one spot, number one bait, finesse tactic, and it was like we had never left. So people might have said, oh, the Solunar table was wrong today. It was absolutely right. And those are the days you want to put all the odds in your favor. If you think about the Bassmaster Classic this year, Hank Cherry won it. 99% of the guys will tell you that was the toughest classic you could have been in. And Hank Cherry weighed in 32 pounds first day. He'll tell you it was the greatest day. He was at the right spot doing the right thing and the fish were feeding. And you can never beat that. And that's what the Solunar tables help you do. They help you decide, you know what? Today's not the day to experiment with new baits. Today's not the day to go to a new lake. Let's go to tried and true presentations on tried and true locations.
Here's something for both you guys, because I know you, Pete, are really interested in shark behavior and predator behavior. So I'm watching a piece a couple of weeks ago. It was Shark Fest or Shark Week or something on Discovery. So late at night, I'm watching this piece about sharks, and it was about shark attacks, peak periods for shark attacks, and all that. And scientists from all over the world were collaborating on trying to figure out, shark behavior and why they attack people and don't attack people and all this stuff. Anyways, the whole thing was fascinating, but I keyed in on one tiny little piece that just, whoa, I said, wow, I got to check this out. So they were talking about predating under low light conditions. And the low light conditions that they spoke of was sun up and sun down, just before when the sun is burning in the sky and it's right on the horizon, or in the morning when it's just coming up and burning on the horizon. Those were the two peak periods for shark predation, as it pertains to not just humans when they would attack humans, but actually when they were feeding. And so they studied it all and did this whole big research thing. And they found something I thought immediately about our predator fishing. And that is that the shark does not predate under those conditions because of the low light, and therefore the ability for the prey, whatever relationship you want to tie into under low light conditions as to why they would be doing it, wasn't that at all. By setting up a series of experiments in controlled environments with lights, using lights and stuff, they found out that the reason that sharks predate under those conditions in shallow water is because they put the sun at their back, and that sun blinds the prey, because all the prey can see is just sort of a shadow. Can't see the fish, the shark itself. It's just a body moving, and therefore it's not alerted. And every time that they would move this light, the shark would change the direction that it would prey from. It always kept the lights back. And I wonder if that's not happening in our freshwater with some of the predators, the apex predators, whether it's muskie or walleye, for example, under those low light conditions, the sun's at their back when they're predating. It's something that I said this year I've got to really try and focus and see if I can use that to my advantage. I found it fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
That's awesome.
John Castleman, Dr. Castleman. John is the best ESOCID researcher on earth. Wrote the book, Freshwater Fishes of Canada, Crossman Castleman. John will tell you, and John guided, put himself through university. He was a guide on the St. Lawrence River. He uses sunlight, and pike will move on to the north shore, south shore, west. They follow, and muskies the very same, Ange, 100%.
Wow.
And it's all silhouetting.
I never thought about that until I saw this piece, and boy, I'll tell you, I'm really looking forward to fishing those conditions this year and putting myself in those prime spots to make contact with some of these big predators, knowing full well that they may be having the sun at their backs. Yeah, I think.
So my question is, how stupid is a seal if a 25-foot shadow is lingering behind you?
They can't see it. They showed that on the film, Pete. They put that bright light at that depth that the seal would be sitting in. They turned that bright light on, simulating the sun, and you can't see anything. I mean, you can barely make out, what's in front of you at that split second. You can't see it. When it positions itself with the sun at its back and makes that final lunge and attack. And the reason that this whole thing came up is because we've all seen the videos where, you've got these big 400, 500, 600 pound sharks sort of mingling with their food and not really even thinking of attacking that food. It's kind of just, they're coexisting. And they were talking about how it knows when it can attack and succeed and when it can't. And so why waste time, right? There's no way it's going to catch that fish just on a sprint. That fish will be gone. And so it waits for that proper positioning, the proper moment. And then when it's got it and everything is aligned, boom.
Very cool.
I'll tell you guys, I know there's some folks here watching in. I'll share with you something that took me a lifetime to discover about muskies. I've only shared this one other time. This has been a secret. I almost shouldn't tell you again, but I'm going to do it.
We're honored and privileged.
Okay.
Thank you.
I won the Molson Big Fish Contest in Ontario. It was 3 or 4 years in a row. Biggest muskie released in Ontario. And those same years, I caught the biggest northern pike also. And I never ever targeted northerns. I caught those all accidentally fishing for muskies. And what I always do now, today, we hit waypoint buttons. This was actually before, I guess GPS was just starting out. I started looking, what makes these spots special? What are on? I had one spot that was insane, absolutely insane. And there was a hydro line run, underwater hydro lines, Lake of the Woods, 14,000 islands on Lake of the Woods. They've all got the big Muskoka type cottages on them. So there's underwater hydro going down 10, 15 miles down the lake. On every one of my best spots, there was an underwater hydro line going through. And if you think about on the West Coast for salmon, the biggest secret of the commercial fishermen, they run electrical pulses out on the outriggers, and they don't share those, whatever that frequency of electrical pulse going through the water is. I guarantee those muskies are pulling in. There's something about the electrical current in the water. And if you were a kid in the old days, on the Christmas tree, you'd take a light out and put your finger in, oh my God, and you get buzzed. There's something about electrical wires going. Now, the wire means nothing. If you have a good spot, a good structure, whatever, and it's got an underwater electrical cable close by, I guarantee it is a hot spot.
Look at that.
I think there is something to that for sure. For sure. And thanks for sharing that with us, man. Everybody now, you're looking like, where's the wires? Where's the wires?
Just in the muskies too, because as you know, the spot I'm going to be talking about on the Bay of Quinte, we call it the cable. There's the cable that runs across right at the very start of the long reach, and it goes right across the bay, and it's a known walleye attracting area. People call it the cable. Do you go to the cable today? Do you try it? And there's a bass on the shoreline, and there's walleye, and you can troll back and forth, and you go right across from the shoreline to shoreline, shallow, deep, and guys are constantly catching big walleye, lots of walleye and big walleye on that cable. So I mean,
The fact that we just talked about 3 species now, right? And electrical wires. So maybe what we should start keying in on is not that it's drawing. It's not that whatever it is that pulse that current is drawing those predators, but it's drawing food. I think that's
Yes.
It's drawing maybe microorganisms. Maybe it's drawing something we can't even see to that area, and therefore, as we know, predators are never too far behind, as opposed to a particular species, like in your case, Gord, muskie, and Pete, you're talking about walleye and bass. I think
I'm sure you're right, Ange. They're all there for one reason. It's pulled in the plankton, it's pulled in the perch, it's pulled in the shiners, it's pulled in the herring, and you find the food, you find the fish.
Sure.
I bet I got something on Gord Pyzer finally right now. I know what he's doing. He's carrying a generator in his boat, and then he's going to let on the shoreline, start it up, run a big cable under the water, bring it back out. I got you, Pyzer. I know what you're all about now. Okay, I got you.
You got me, Pete.
We're way too far into our time here. I need to ask you some of the questions that I had earmarked for you that I think are important that we bring up, and we'll get to some of the questions, guys. Don't despair. Steve will keep putting them up on the screen for us, and we'll tack them as well. But I want to talk to you about an interesting story that you shared with me a few weeks ago, just prior to going on air with our radio show, about Lake of the Woods, and the information that you had just stumbled upon from a good friend, and what walleye fishing on that lake looks like. I think we owe it to all the walleye anglers and anglers period to hear this.
Yeah, it's I've spent my life, the better part of my life, on Lake of the Woods. It's where my ashes will be spread when it's all over. When I came here, it was the Lake of the Quarter Pounder. It was heavily, intensively commercial fished. The sport, there's 78 main-based lodges on it. It's the biggest international or non-resident sport fishery in Canada. We're within 10 hours of 100 million people. And I was lucky to be the DM here. We went to special regs. We bought out the non-native commercial fishery, and the lake blossomed. It absolutely blossomed in the late 90s, in the early 2000s. And as anglers, unfortunately, we can't live with success. And the harvest now is incredible. Both sport fish and the First Nation netting, and it resembles Lake Nipissing. I have heard from the M&R folks that it is in dire straits, and we need to get quickly to special regulations. We need to get to two walleye limits. We need to get to nothing over 18. I was the one that put the first 18-inch size limit in Ontario in place. I happen to chair the resident, non-resident tourist industry modernization of the fish regs, and we went to the one over 18. And it was meant to allow you to kill a trophy, the trophy of a life. Now it's become a target. Oh, I got my one over. Well, it was never meant to be, I got my 22-incher. We would always like you to have kept all your fish under 18. We actually would have liked it to have been 16 inches. A mature walleye spawns at 16. If we had limits that were 16 inches and smaller and put them all back, we'd have the best of all possible worlds. Anyway, I'm afraid to say Lake of the Woods, walleye appears to be in trouble.
What has to happen, Gord, in order to save it? What has to happen right now?
And it's not unlike the coronavirus in terms of testing. We need to know the numbers. We know fish are very easy to manage. I spent my life managing fish. Fish are very easy to manage. Anglers are a pain in the ass to manage. And that is our problem. We have too many people chasing too few fish. So we know what the harvest is, and let's say it's 600,000 pounds. Until you know how many are netted, how many are eaten for subsistence, and how many are caught by resident anglers, you can't manage. And so we need everyone to sit down, and we need to say, we all agree 600,000 is the target. And if you're a First Nation netter, let's agree you have X amount. If you're the tourist industry, you have Y amount. And if you're a sport fisherman, you have A amount. And fish are no different than bank accounts. If you live on the interest, you'll always have the principal. If you spend twice your interest, you will go bankrupt.
Are you suggesting that maybe we need to put not just daily possession limits on people, but are you saying that the fishery itself, the body of water, the managers of that fishery, lodge owners, First Nations, that they're given a quota?
Well, that is the way we do it anyway, Ange. We do it that's how every lake in Ontario is managed. That is how we manage. Now we do it kind of a retrograde in a sense. That's why we do creel surveys. It tells you whether we know how many fish can come out of any water body. And so so all you ever need to know is, are we living within the limits? I put the first 48-inch limit on muskies in the world on Lake of the Woods. We went to 54-inch. Muskies are a great, great example. This is the best muskie fish we have in Ontario on Lake of the Woods, Eagle, Lac, Sewell, Ottawa River, St. Lawrence River, Nipissing. We have the greatest muskie fisheries in the world because we know how many are in there. We know that we went to 54-inch limits. Those fish are always reproducing. How is it that we have the greatest muskie fisheries and they're getting better and better and better? Why don't we do that for smallmouth and walleye?
Because we have limited exposure. Muskie are being hunted down and fished by muskie anglers. Unlike fishermen in general, a muskie fisherman, for the most part, I mean, there's incidental catches, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, you need to be targeting that fish in order to successfully catch it. And fortunately, we have got some incredibly wonderful sportsmen and women in that muskie fraternity, and they understand it, they get it, right? And they handle these things with care. If we could kind of impart that philosophy in all fishing, whether it's bass, walleye, crappie, I don't care. I think we could achieve what you're talking about, but unfortunately,
100%.
We don't have. And the other thing too, and I say this because this is going to open up a whole can of worms, no pun intended. You know, we have and you've talked about it a couple times now. We have a First Nations fishery that doesn't target muskie necessarily, and that's probably why they're off the radar. But they do target walleye. They do target a lot of these other game fish, and not that there's anything wrong with that. Fundamentally speaking, there is a lot wrong with that when you're trying to keep numbers and inventory levels and not knowing what's being taken out. You made a good point, about 650,000 fish that you can fish out of a lake, whether it's Lake of the Woods or any other body of water. That's great to know, but not knowing how much is being taken out is utter, to me, stupidity.
You can't manage.
How can you manage it? How can you even enforce it when you don't know?
And if you have $100,000 in your bank account and your wife has a credit card and you have a credit card and you're making 10%, that means you can spend $10,000 a year. If you know what you're spending and you or your wife knows what she's spending, she does, you guys can't manage. You have to know what it's producing and you have to know how much you can spend. And here's the more important thing. If you spend less than the interest, your principal gains. And so you get better and better and better bank accounts and you get better and better fisheries. It is not difficult to manage fish, but our problem is we have too many anglers chasing too few fish. And more importantly, it's biologically, it's called the tragedy of the commons.
Peter, how do you solve this problem, buddy?
Well, you know what? The problem, I think, in addition to the problem, and I still see this to this day, is that there are still a lot of, let's say, licensed anglers that are of the mind frame that I have to keep every fish because I want to eat every fish, right? Right there, that their mind frame, and I don't think we're ever going to change that. No offense to the people watching, because if you love, I love eating fish, Gord loves eating fish, and Angelo loves eating fish, okay? But I've got buddies still to this day that they will not go on that lake and they will have to bring their limit home no matter what. They might call through, whatever they're doing. They have to bring their limit home of any species, crappies, bass, largemouth bass. They get some private areas up north that they have to put 6 bass per person in the truck to go home with it. So that, to me, right there, that mentality, I mean, and I don't even know if you'll stop it. Hopefully they would go with the ministry's reduction. Let's say they say, okay, we're going to go down to 4 bass. We're going to go down to 2 walleye or whatever. Hopefully they'll adhere to it. But there's still that mind frame out there that these people have to keep fish. And the other thing everybody has to keep in mind, and I don't care if it's anglers, licensed anglers, unlicensed anglers, First Nations or whatever, poaching is still out there no matter what. All right. And let's be honest. Poaching, Ange and I now we're posting all these stories about poachers that we really didn't even understand were even out there. But there's so much poaching going on, and those that are caught are 10% of what's out there too. And that's in the native community too. Even though there are a lot of these amount of fish, they're allowed to get this amount of fish. I've seen so many times. I lived in Napanee in Springside Park where the natives just sat there with the spears and yeah, I don't care. There's no limit for me. You know what I mean? So there's this mind frame, and that's poaching to me. It's that's all got to somehow be controlled. I don't know how we can control it, but it's got to be controlled somehow.
Gord?
Yeah, I'll say the tragedy of the commons, guys, is if I go out and I keep twice my limit, or if I'm a cottager and I run out and I catch a limit and I come back to the cottage and I drop it and I run back out, catch another limit, and I'll do that 3-4 times. The tragedy of the commons means I get the benefit of those fish. And if the fishery goes down, I only share 1/3 because you guys also bear the brunt of the downside. I get all the benefit. And that is the tragedy of the commons. And what happened, the best example was the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, the greatest cod fishery the world has ever seen. The Grand Banks of Newfoundland, believe it or not, was the highest biomass of animal flesh the world has ever seen. More animal biomass on the Grand Banks of when the Portuguese and when Jean Cabot come over in the 1500s, they could not throw barrels over into the ocean to get seawater to clean the boats. They were full of cod. Today, it is illegal for us to go out. So when those guys were commercial fishing, if Angie, you had a big cod fishery boat, if you could get them before me, you gained the benefit. And Pete paid the price and I paid the price. And that's what the tragedy of the commons is. And it's in every sport fish lake in Ontario. It's happening in Rice Lake, Bay of Quinte, Lake of the Woods, Eagle Lake, Nipissing. And we have to become stewards, and we have to say, what, number one, what's in the best interest of the fish?
It's a great point on the screen right now. We can't interfere on First Nations traditions. We can only hope conservation is on their mind as well. And I want to make a point about that. The reason I highlight, I want to make a point about that. as we travel across Canada every year shooting the show, we get to meet an awful lot of people, as you can appreciate, Gord. And a lot of those people are First Nations people. And I got to stand up for them right now because, you know, far too many of us paint them all with the same brush. And there are so many really good sound conservationists within that community who really care about the resource and practice good sound, uh, uh, you know, methods of conserving the resource, and are ambassadors for conservation and sportsmanship. But we forget about those people, and we just automatically think that this applies to all First Nations, and it does not. They have
No.
rotten apples just like everybody else does.
Oh
And
yeah.
right, and unfortunately, those rotten apples, they get all of the press, and they get all of the media, and they get all of us pointing fingers at them, and not isolating them as just plain perpetrators. They're criminals, just like in
Yeah.
any other society. They're poachers. A poacher is a poacher is a poacher. No matter what color your skin is or where you're from.
Yeah.
And I that's our problem right now. But I know personally, and I know Pete has too. We've talked to some First Nations people who are, when we start talking about limits, especially on Lake Nipissing. I'll give you a really good example. They're devastated when these numbers come up, and all of the doom and gloom. They're devastated as much as us, that love fishing and our sports people in our communities. They're scrambling to find solutions and answers too. But
I know of native fishermen that will go out and buy a fishing license, and he doesn't even need it, but he does to support. I know a few. They've told me, Pete, hey, check this out, Pete. He said, I don't need to, but I do it just to help support. So there are good ones out there for sure. They don't have to do that, but he doesn't.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
I ice fished all winter. I killed 4 walleyes on Lake of the Woods this winter. 4 in total. Liam killed none, but so when we kept perch most of the time. We pet the walleye back, but you guys are absolutely right. At the end of the day, what we need to do, we need to bring the tourist industry, the angler hunter community, and the First Nations together. And that's what we did this when we bought out and we modernized the regs here on the lake. And you bring those 3 groups together and you say, guys, what's the most important thing in every one of us? What's the most important? And it's the resource. If you don't have the resource, none of us win. We all lose. So if we can start out from the principle that the resource is the most important thing, now how do we share it? And then once we've agreed, here's how we share it, how do we enforce that sharing? And it's as simple as that.
I also want to throw one other thing by both of you guys, and I know you've both heard it. I certainly have many a time. When we talk about limits and saying, you just said that maybe we should lower the limits for walleye on Lake of the Woods, or maybe we should look at the Nipissing model and see if we can adapt it to Lake of the Woods. There are a group of people out there who might say to you, yeah, well, I think it's best that we allow people to take those 6 fish every day that they go out and get off the water and go home. As opposed to you guys who are going to be out there, yeah, you're not taking anything home. You're releasing everything you're doing. But you're making contact with 10 times the amount of fish that meat hunter who goes out to get his 6 fish a day is going to ever kill. What do you guys think of that?
Well, I'll go first, Gord, because I know you probably have a good one on this. 2 things for sure. Number one, what Ann said last week or the week before, he said, I know for sure that a fish that I release is going to have another chance at spawning and living his life. I know the fish that you fillet is dead and gone forever. That's number one. So there's a comparison there. And number 2, that guy that catches that limit, I'll go to what Gord just said. And I've seen this many times, is that guy goes out and catch a Lake Simcoe. I saw a guy catching 5 and 6 pound smallmouth bass, throwing them on a stringer, 2 of them in the boat. So there's a dozen big smallies into the shoreline, and half an hour later, he's back out fishing again. And he's back out fishing for smallmouth in it. He's not fishing for anything else because this shoal had only smallmouth on it. I looked at him. I said, what the F are you doing out there, buddy? And I shamed him into getting the hell away from that area. But I guarantee you, he was filling his freezer up as many times. So you can't, these people that love getting these fish, and there's certain poachers or individuals out there they're going to just load that freezer up until they can't catch anymore. And they're going to just ruin it for everybody. So
Scott just had a really, really good comment.
Yeah.
Because I watch my grandson, and Liam says to me, I have no interest killing a lake trout anytime. I don't care if the limit's 2. I don't care if the limit's 1. I just enjoy catching these fish so much. And you know what? The younger generation, if we can get to them being the leaders, they will save us. I hate to say this, guys, but most of our problems are guys about our age or a little bit younger. Now here's something though that's really interesting on walleye. 1/3 of the walleyes, if you're a walleye angler, you go out and we go out and maybe you say, I caught 30 today and I was using a jig and a minnow. I caught 30 and I let them all go. The likelihood is you kill 10. When you use live bait for walleye, and Minnesota's done some magnificent work on this. So when Minnesota does its creels, 1/3. So they'll ask you, how many fish did you catch today? And if you caught 30 and let them all go, they actually determined that you killed 10 fish, about a 30% mortality rate on walleye. If you put walleye in the live well, a real good friend of mine did his master's thesis on walleyes in live well. Walleye are the worst fish you can put in a live well. If you're going to keep a walleye, if you put it in the live well, that's where it should stay. Should never go back into the lake. And so you get guys culling all day long, and they're culling for this. I got one 16, and now I got one 16 1/4. 8 hours later, and he pulls a whitish walleye out of the live well and lets him go and puts that for a 1/4 of an inch. Are you kidding me? The young guys don't do that.
No. There was a good point just up on the screen, Stephen, if you can bring it back up. This is a good one for you, Gord, because obviously you were involved in this back in your former career. Why is the restocking effort in Canada so much lower than it is in the US?
That's really good. A really good question. I'll tell you one thing, and I know most guys aren't going to like this. We don't ever want to be stocking. If you could get to no stocking is an admission of failure. Now, there are some really good times when you do want to stock. Our trout lakes in Ontario, they're magnificent. And that's a really good time to stock a lake. So we stock speckled trout or rainbows or whatever, and we create additional fishing opportunities. Very, very expensive. If you knew how much each one of those fish that was going in the lake cost, you'd start scratching your head. But stocking for walleye, as a general rule, stocking walleye, total waste of time, total waste of money. It is the worst thing you could ever. The day we start stocking walleye as a standard course will be the day our walleye fisheries are in really bad shape. When I was the DM here in Kenora, I co-chaired the Minnesota Walleye Fisheries Technical Committee, and that was all the bios in Minnesota. I co-chaired it with Jack Skrypek, who was the Director of Fisheries for Minnesota, and we had all the bios here in Northwest Ontario. And that was back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Minnesota was spending over about 70% of its budget on walleye stocking. And it was wasting their money. But it was so hard to convince anglers that fortunately they've got away from it. In fact, the worst year classes often were when you had a strong natural event, a strong walleye year class, and you put stocked fish over top. I could go on and on for hours and hours and hours why stocking, as a general rule, doesn't work, and it's very, very expensive, and it eats up all your money. And in the US, they have to do it. They've got 350 million people, and they often have reservoirs that have poor structure, aren't receptive to natural reproduction. So you can stock those lakes, but fish where you guys are, versus going down. You want to fish tough fisheries. I know everybody watches Bassmaster and FLW, and all you ever see are those top 2, 3, 4, 5 guys that finish up. But those are the best anglers in the world.
Yeah.
And these are the Chris Johnsons, Corey Johnsons, Jeffy Gustafsons. They can't wait to get home to fish Rice Lake, the St. Lawrence River, Lake Simcoe, Lake of the. Those are tough fisheries down there.
Yeah.
Really, really tough. And
Yeah.
those are the best anglers, often weighing in 5 pounds a day. So if you're a newbie and a guy starting out, ask yourself how many you're going to catch.
I'll throw this at both of you guys. We just had a question up about barbless hooks. And if we truly want to practice catch and release, should we go to a straight right across the board? And maybe this is more of a national thing, as opposed to a provincial thing. There are no more barbs on any of our baits. What do you guys think of that? Pete?
You know what? I will do whatever it takes for sure. You know what I mean? If that's going to help the fishery, and I believe it would help the fishery as an all round. I think guys like us, no offense to everybody watching, but if there's a first-time angler compared to us, we know how to handle, we know how to take a hook, we know a little bit more about that kind of stuff. But all in all, if it would help the fishery, then sure, why not? You know what I mean? Yeah, you're going to lose a small percentage more. You're not going to lose a higher percentage than people think, but why not? And some provinces still do it, right? Gord just fishes Manitoba a lot. I think they used to be. I'm sure they still are.
Yes, it is. Manitoba is essentially 100% barbless.
Yeah, so I think it wouldn't hurt.
Can we? Do you think we could do that? You think we could at some point say, okay, as of tomorrow, we are totally barbless? Is that even possible in this province?
I think if you could show the benefits, Angelo, that's always the case. If you show anglers, here's the benefit.
But beyond that, think of what we're asking people to do. They've got hundreds, if not thousands of dollars worth of tackle, and every one of them have barbs on them.
Pinch them down.
Get a pair of pliers. What the hell? They're all going to pair of pliers.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Marty.
Go ahead. Sorry, Gord. Carry on.
But I'm not, interestingly enough, I'm not sure the evidence is totally there on barbless.
Right.
I know it makes release much easier. And so if you're specially managing a lake, absolutely do it. As a universal tool, I think there are many, many, many things we could do to have better fisheries before we needed to go 100% barbless. And I've actually seen some hooking mortality work, science work, that you actually get deeper penetration of hooks and potentially drives the hook in deeper and causes more damage when there isn't the barb on it than when there is. So I'd want to see a little more research first.
Alberta was barbless for 2 years. Then, unfortunately, they took the regulation away. I just read that. I don't know. I know Angelo and I, we fished it in a barbless time, but I wonder now. But taking it away, there's obviously a reason right there. If that's a true statement, you know what I mean? The MNR or their MNR would have done a research and done that.
On the surface, I mean, it makes sense. We've all been in situations where we've hooked the fish, and if we didn't have that barb on there, it would have been great release. But because it was barbed, we might have inadvertently killed that fish or ultimately killed that fish. So we've all been there. On the surface, it looks like it's the right answer, but as Gord just pointed out, it'd be nice to see a little more research on it before we made that kind of. Here's one. Maintenance guy says, what causes 30% of catch and release to die? First of all, are we certain on that number? Are we all comfortable with 30%?
The real proviso, it is much, much worse on live bait. Yeah. And here's the funny thing. When we started off, I think the show, we were talking about those heavier jigs, fish and swim baits. Pete was talking about X-Rep. The amazing thing is, and you can't convince a lot of walleye guys this, that you don't need live bait to catch walleyes. It truly, and as I said about fishing with Doug in those early days of our swim bait career, I was afraid we were going to ruin the walleye population, but you can't convince a walleye guy not to put a minnow on. And the problem with live bait, especially live bait and jigs, and so for the folks watching us right now, when you go out this summer, watch when you catch a fish, a jig and a minnow, jig and a leech, or a jig and a crawler, look where your jig is. And I almost guarantee more than a third will be well in the mouth, through the roof of the mouth, right up in the brain. And it might swim away, but just imagine, put that jig in your mouth, drive it through the roof of your mouth into your brain, and think how many are going to survive. And I always say to folks, imagine being in a bank when a bank robber comes in and he's got a gun and he shoots you, and you crawl your way out of the bank. It would be like the bank. Well, he got away. He crawled out of the bank. The walleye swam away. That doesn't mean it didn't die 10 minutes, an hour, 2 hours later.
That's a good one. I like that.
I thought about this one way too much.
That's good.
I'm glad we're on that subject, because I think it's quite important. So the question here was 30%. So why do 30% die? To answer that question, if we can, is because of things like Gord just pointed out, right? Whether that hook's in here or in there, it does do damage to the fish.
Yeah.
However, I just do want to point out, in case anybody is listening that is on the other side of our fence and says, "Aha, you guys admit it," catch and release works, and it is very, very successful. In fact, we wouldn't have. I'm convinced, had that movement not started when it did in the late 70s, early 80s, we would have no fishery today, just like most of the world, just like Europe. We'd have no fishery to be talking about. So catch and release does work. It's not perfect. We don't have all the answers, but it does work, and we need to keep it up.
And the other thing I would say, guys, as hard as this is, for a lot of folks, it's like loons. Yes, a loon may go down and swallow a lead sinker and die. You don't manage fish and wildlife populations on an individual fish basis. You don't manage loon populations on a 1 loon or 2 loon basis. You manage them on the population level. And on a population level, catch and release is absolutely essential. And on a population level, catch and release of the biggest fish, they are the fish that lays the golden egg. Bruce Tufts at Queen's University, he teaches biology down there. And Bruce, for his lab students and university students, he has T-shirts made up, "Big Fish Matter." A big walleye, a 10, 12-pound walleye, is laying 1/2 to 3/4 million eggs a year. A fish is one of the few animals that is still reproducing on the day it dies. They are not people. And the worst thing we do is attribute human qualities to them. A fish is a fish. The biggest fish, the oldest fish, are laying the biggest eggs. They have the biggest opportunity to find a sperm to reproduce. 14 or 16, 17, 18-inch walleye, they reproduce at about a 45% success rate. The big walleyes are in 92%. You want those big fish in a population. And absolutely, catch and release is the reason we have the best sport fisheries in the world.
And the question just up there, Pete, if we can put that back up, Stephen. He says, Scott says, who else here has caught the same fish twice over the same period of time?
Yeah, last time too, Ange and I. Yeah. Now I'm gonna give a little, maybe a challenge or whatever to people, or it's kind of a real life thing that Ange and Gord and I have done. And we're old guys. We used to catch and keep and kill and eat a lot of fish. Okay, and we've learned to adapt this catch and release method. I can guarantee you, if you do this and get on to catch and release, you will feel much more satisfaction throwing back a 5-pound largemouth bass, throwing back a 10-pound walleye, throwing back a 35-pound muskie or a 20-pound pike than you ever will of killing one. It is the best feeling in the world of going out and capturing this beast that has eluded you all summer long. You get a look at him, get a beautiful picture of him, and then just say, here you go, young lady, go back there and do your thing or whatever. It's such a great feeling that there's something about catch and release fishing that once it's ingrained in you, there's nothing better than throwing back.
100%. And I see Scott just posted a comment across about, I would agree. I wish we didn't have the one-overs. I'll tell you, I chaired the committee that had that on it. And we did it for a reason, but the reason got lost, and it was to allow you to catch the trophy of a lifetime to mount it. So if you caught a 12-pound walleye, I talked about you don't manage on an individual fish basis. You can allow a few if you're generally managing none. But we've lost sight of the point of the one over. Now it's become a target. Guys catch 21-inch, 22, 19-inch, and they keep them. That was never the point. So I would support, as a general rule, I would support as a general rule none over. I was the one actually that went to the first 54-inch limit here on muskies. I guarantee we've caught a fish here, 2 or 3 friends, and they posted it. It's got lymphosarcoma on the side. I guarantee it's been caught at least 3 times over 4 years. The very same fish. Imagine if someone killed that at 28 inches. It's now 50, 52. Magnificent fish. Those genes are still in the population. It's provided 4 times the opportunity. Other people have probably seen it. Catch and release of big fish matters.
And if we don't do that, and a big part of this is self-management too. We can't put all of the blame here on M&R.
Nope.
Or whoever is managing the wildlife. It's incumbent upon us to manage ourselves. And I just want to point out a lake that's very close to us here, and that's Lake Scugog. Used to be a walleye factory. Literally, it was a walleye factory. It was a mini. You can compare it to any big walleye lake you want, whether it's Lake of the Woods, Bay of Quinte. Scugog was it, except it was tiny, small, very local. And for years, some of the ardent anglers, were saying, "Hey, we've got to do something about this, man. There's too many fish being taken. That those 6 fish limits are going to take their toll every day. Somebody after work, everybody's going fishing every night and bringing fish home. Yeah, but we've got so many fish in Scugog, and it's so weedy and it's so fertile. It's never going to be a problem." It became a problem, and the moratorium was the only solution at that point. I'm not suggesting that that's going to happen to Lake of the Woods, but we better start listening to people like you and everybody else that wants to cry the blues about what's going on Lake of the Woods and take it seriously, because it could shut down completely.
I actually grew up fishing Lake Scugog. The first big muskie I had on as about a 6 or 7-year-old was on Lake Scugog. Yeah. Now this is scary, but up here in Kenora, when I was with M&R here, our biologists would look at some of the smaller lakes, say the 800, 900 acre lakes, and we'd count cottages. If every cottager kept one limit over the year, we were overfishing the lake. It's as simple as that. It's the bank account. 90% of our lakes have nothing in them. They're deserts. 10% of the lake has 90% of the fish. Our average walleye lakes in Ontario have 4 fish per acre over 12 inches. What? That's it.
Really?
That's our average 4 to 5 fish. They're not factories. We keep talking about walleye factories as though there's millions and millions. They're not. Now, there's a huge range, but 4 or 5, Dr. Peter Colby was a good friend, and Peter ran our walleye research station out of the Savan Lake area. And 4, 5, 6 walleye per acre is a pretty good walleye lake on the Shield.
Wow. And you're looking at the wild, but I just thought of something that you're going to reiterate Gord's answer and a different fish. Smallmouth bass, St. Lawrence River, when we drop a camera down and take a look. So much vast water of nothing. Then all of a sudden, poof, a big bunch of fish. Well, for poop, there are 5 or 6 or 7 fish. Never, maybe once in a while you'll see one, but rare. But you can drift a mile down that river and see nothing. Then all of a sudden, bang, there's a cluster of fish. And there are another 2 miles of nothing. So I'm sure it's with all species too, right, Gord? I'm assuming, anyways.
Oh, 100%, Pete. With muskies and the top predators, it's even worse.
Yeah.
Lake trout. Now, lake trout here in Ontario, I think that weighs about 4 ounces. This little piece of wood. Sorry, Steve. There, it's actually a file, but 4 ounces. Our best lake trout, our lake trout lakes in Ontario, sustainable harvest, 4 ounces an acre. That's not a half a chocolate bar.
Wow.
If
Oh.
the reality is, I wish we were at 1 trout. I talked earlier. I chaired the industry committee and sport fishery committee on modernizing the sport fish regs. We wanted to go to 1 lake trout limits. We were at 3 at the time, and we couldn't get the angler hunter community to agree to us. And I will give him credit. One of the key folks that was opposed to us. I retired in 2001, and about 2008 or 9, he sent me an email, and he said, Gord, I just want you to know I was your biggest critic when we modernized the regulations. I only wish now I'd listened to you on the trout and we had gone to 1 instead of 2. And I know it's hard. We love fishing. And the other thing I will say is there is nothing wrong with eating fish, but we need to eat the small ones. We need to eat the little guys, the non-spawners. And if we do that, it becomes a win-win. We can have great fisheries. We can have the odd meal. We can eat perch, and we can eat some of those more prolific fish. We can create the win-wins, but it's hard.
I want to put you on the spot, buddy. Not purposely, but I think it's important that we hear the words good or bad. When you were with the M&R, I'm going to set 2 scenarios for you. When you were with the M&R and when you're not with the M&R, in other words, today, what's your feelings on the M&RF needing to dovetail with tourism then and now?
I will say 2 things. I'm no longer there, so I can be honest with you, Ange, because it's a good question. I grew up in the Renaissance. I grew up when in Northern Ontario, you didn't have to say lands. And I grew up with lands and forests. My first job doing my master's work in Algonquin Park, I was lands and forests. I got my uniform downstairs, lands and forests with the peaked hat. It was the Renaissance. And in Northern Ontario, you didn't have to say it. You said the ministry. Everybody knew you were talking M&R. Today, nobody has a clue what you're talking about. And that really bothers me. The M&R today is not the M&R I grew up in. We used to spend more money on fish and wildlife management in Ontario in the 80s and 90s than Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota combined. We don't do that anywhere near that now. And back then, we worried about the resource. Boy, I'm a little bit worried. I just don't see, I hate to say this, I don't, and you can say I'm old and that's just some old guy whining. I don't see the leadership from M&R that we used to see. We were the leaders. We didn't need to be told fisheries were going to, we were the leaders and we forced things. I went to a 48 and then a 54-inch limit on Lake of the Woods. I didn't need someone to tell me we needed to do that. I contacted Muskies Canada. I contacted Muskies Inc. I contacted the tourist industry, and I contacted OFAH. And I said, listen, guys, the only guys that are killing these fish are walleye and bass guys that catch them accidentally. Let's, damn it, go to a 48 or a 52-inch limit. I didn't need to have 2.5 friggin' years of public consultation. We did it, and we were shocked. Our assessment unit was shocked. Every time we moved the limit up, the fish got bigger. And we go, holy geez, I thought this was going to take 20 years. We see it in 5 friggin' years.
Nice.
So M&R is not leading the way it used to lead. Sorry to say.
Yeah, unfortunately, right?
How important, though, is it that M&R works hand in hand or not with tourism?
I would say it's important, but they're not responsible for tourism. You have another ministry. And I had this argument actually with a local M&R bio here about 3 or 4 years ago. And I said, man, you can't continue to do this. You got to, these limits are crazy. Guys, you could see it nosediving. And he said, oh, you're anti-tourism, you're anti-walleye tournament. And I said, hey, wait a sec. Your job isn't to worry about the tourist industry. Your job isn't to worry about the tournament groups. Your job is to manage fish. And you damn well better manage them well. And when you do, there are other people who have a responsibility for managing. They have a vested interest. That's not your vested interest. Your vested interest is managing fish, managing wildlife, and damn it, you better do it well.
Took a bit, but I wanted to get that out of you, and I'm glad you took the bait, as it were. So I applaud you for that. And just to finish that statement off, if that happens, and if we manage the fishery properly, and if we keep it and maintain it, and in fact grow it, tourism will come along for the ride, because it is, right? Word gets out, and
this is the honest truth. This is the honest truth. When we modernized the regs and the tourist, they gave me the President's Cup twice from Nowata, Northwest Ontario, twice. And believe it or not, and I give them nothing but credit, they were dear friends. It's because I fought with them. And they said to me at the time, you can't go to 4 fish limits. You can't go to 1 over. Nobody will come. I said, if you build it, they will come. We created fisheries that nobody had, and now we're flooded.
Yeah, and let's use our good friend Ted Putnam, as an example up on Hawk Lake. Very bold step and very difficult decisions to make. When you go to total catch and release on your business, boy, you got coyotes on you the size of an elephant. And we need more of that type of thinking, because it will enhance tourism. It won't harm it. It'll enhance it. People will be lined up to use that fishery when we tell them it's so good, you can't keep a single one. That's how precious it is to us.
He's smart too, right? Because Ted's smart. He's got a trophy fishery, and he imports. He buys fish for people to eat. People still want to eat, have that shoreline. He puts the whole package together: tourism and great fishing.
Yeah.
It's very easy.
Now, here's the downside. What happens if all the local residents from Kenora drive over there in the winter and ice fish and keep them? And you go, you can't. That's why we have to work together.
Yeah.
That's why we've got to say the Hawk Lakes of the world, they are treasures, and they're treasures for everybody. So if the tourist operator has done this, and you can get the cottagers, let's do it. Let's regulate it. Let's say this has really bothered me on smallmouth. Here we are, the province of Ontario, with 400,000 lakes. Why do we manage every one of them the same way? Why don't we say for smallmouth, like we did with muskies? With muskies here, we said Lake of the Woods, Eagle, Lac, Sewell, Ottawa, River. These are treasures. These are the greatest lakes in the world. They have the opportunity to produce world-class fisheries. Why don't we manage them that way? Well, we can do the same for walleye. We can do the same for smallmouth. We don't have to take the lazy, easy way out and manage every one the very same way. We can manage some of these as special treasures. It takes a little more work, takes a lot more work, but that's what we should be in it for.
Very well said, my friend. Extremely well.
Absolutely.
we've got to get on with things. First of all, there was a question just up on the screen I thought might be kind of interesting. Angelo and Pete, who has caught the largest catch and release fish, and what was it? Here we go.
Catch and release fish.
Oh, I know we caught together. We caught the biggest fish of our life, and that was
It'd be sturgeon in BC. That'd be our biggest catch and release fish, I would think, right?
Not mine, I don't think, but I could be wrong. But I'm going to throw it out there. My black marlin.
Oh, right.
Canada.
Oh, no. Yeah, you're right. That's for sure. That's your biggest and by far the biggest catch. The biggest fish released between Ange and I for sure. That was like over 400 pounds. Oh no, I got a poor beagle shark that was 440 pounds, and we threw that back. So it's close.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Mine is the black marlin for sure. I think it was a 450, and I'm pretty sure you caught the same thing in your shark off of Halifax. So we're even on that one.
Yeah. That's true. I forgot all about those. So there you go.
How about you, Gord? What's your biggest catch and release fish?
I got an 850, a 900, and a 950-pound bluefin tuna, all released. I was in Australia, got a 450-pound black marlin. We released it, and I came home with the hook, and I've got the hook hanging up in my fishing room. Nice. And you know what? Those are the greatest fish we've caught, eh? They're the ones we remember.
Yeah.
I didn't need to kill them.
I was going to say, when we were talking about that a little earlier on, and I don't remember the moment it happened, but there was a moment in my life, and I'm sure both you guys will agree. There's a moment in your life where yes, the act of fishing is still very important, and you have a passion for it, and you just want to experience as much as you can. But there's a moment in your fishing life that crosses a threshold of some type, and I don't know what it is or what causes it, but the act of fishing isn't necessarily why you're there. And I don't know whether I'm explaining this properly or not. To me, being out and experiencing all of the adventure that surrounds a fishing day, culminating with putting those fish back, far outweighs my want to go fishing. Does that make sense at all? To me personally, it's not about the fishing, it's about all of the other activities and releasing that fish as part of those activities that gets me cranked up, and I just love doing that stuff. And I think if everybody gets to that point in their fishing lives, we don't have to worry about talking about catch and release. Work, does it not work? Should we practice it? Should we not practice? Because it just becomes, as a matter of fact, it's what you do. That is what fishing is. Fishing is about releasing those fish, and that will have to happen in the younger generations coming in behind us, obviously, because you guys both pointed out that the biggest problem with retention of limits is it happening within our age group. And we still have that mentality that, no, everything we contact, we must kill, right? I don't think the younger folks are buying into that notion.
Because, Ange, there's a good question. Somebody just wrote, has anyone talked about banning ice fishing? And long before we ban ice fishing or ban any kind of fishing, no, really, if we control the harvest, who cares when you catch it?
That's right.
That's the point. We're providing fishing opportunities. We're doing exactly what you're talking about, Ange. It's being out there. And if one of our listeners enjoys ice fishing more than he enjoys open water, why should I tell him he should not be allowed to ice fish? The issue isn't when you catch it, it's how you caught it and how you handled it, and if it was safely returned. Honest truth, when I was listening to you, Ange, I often get asked, and I'm sure you do, what do you like fishing for the most? And my answer always is whatever I'm fishing for right now. And I honestly can walk down to the dock, and if there's 8 little kids, 5, 6, 7-year-olds, and they're holding little piece of 6-pound test line and a little hook with a worm on it, and they're catching pumpkin seeds this big, if I lay down with them leaning over the dock, That I love that.
Yeah,
That is my fun. That's
yeah.
what it's all about.
That is so true. That is so true. You know, the kids nowadays, like my boy Cole. I've told Angela's story many times. Gord, you might even heard of this. That him and we used to go. I used to take him out before he even wanted to fish. He'd fish for a little bit, but he loved the idea of putting fish in a live well, watching them swim around, and then we'd throw everything back at the end of the day, right? And including the panfish or whatever like that. And if he caught any, put them in the box, Daddy. That was the same. Put them in the box, Daddy. Well, that was it. They don't even put them in the box. And I say, okay, but we're going to throw them back. Yeah, good. So progress in time, and we were walleye fishing one night. And we were fishing this time. I'm out fishing for walleye. We haven't had a feeder fish in a while. I wouldn't mind keeping a couple like that. So he catches a 3.5-pound walleye. His first walleye ever. He's proud as a peacock. You know, and I put him in the box. And I says, "Well, you know what? We should take this one home and give him to Grandpa. And we'll cut him up and eat him." He goes, "Oh no, you're not killing my fish, Daddy." And I couldn't do anything but release that fish. I mean, that kid who wanted that fish put back. So I said, "You know what? I have to do that." So since then, he has progressed a bit in that he knows that we will selectively keep a few fish, just what we need for supper and all that. I mean, now he's good with it, but honest to God, he would throw everyone back still to this day. He really would. And I think the youth is like that. Nick, I don't know if he's ever kept a fish, probably, you know what I mean? He throws everything back. So they're learning, and I think the future is good for that part of it right now. Right now, it's us old guys. It's the people that want to keep everything. So, but I think there's a good future. Honestly.
I do too, Pete. The other thing, listening to you there, is how many times have we talked to bass anglers and they'll go, I release all my bass. And then they're out in the fall in October, November, and they'll catch smallmouth and they'll call up to their 5 biggest smallmouth all day long. And then they'll take a picture when they get back to the dock of 5 over 4 pounds. And they'll go, I released every one of them. When you do that in November, 30 to 50% are dead, are going to die over the winter. Once you move them from their fall wintering area, you might as well have stuck a knife in them.
That's a great point. That's a great
Wow.
You know
so
I mean?
Why are you going to get now upset at the cottager who kept two smallmouth bass for lunch?
Yep.
When you just killed 5 trophies.
True. There you go.
Something else I want to throw by you guys, float this by you. Recently, I got myself in a bit of hot water on the social media circuit.
You always do that.
So,
He's good, eh, Gord? He's good at it.
and you know, there's a lot of takeaways for me from that experience. One of the things I kind of took away is that I'm surprised at the number of people that are claiming that they fish for sustenance. I was shocked.
Really?
Yeah, I was shocked at the number of people that claim that this is how they feed themselves and their family.
Yeah, they made it sound like that's their main source of food too, didn't they? They made that. I was shocked at that one too. That's my main meat on my table. I thought, okay, maybe.
Now, maybe Northern Ontario, Gord, maybe that's a little more prevalent than it is down here. But I was shocked at the number of people that said no, that's how they feed themselves.
Yeah, I do know some folks here, and they do not buy meat other than they eat moose, deer, and fish. And
all right, that's okay. I mean, you got to.
Right? It's all legal. They stay within the possession limits, et cetera, et cetera. It's not 100% bad, but we would like to see it eased up a little bit if it's all they do, right?
I will say this quickly though, Pete, because it is the common refrain. It's legal, and what folks don't realize, the reason that the walleye limit is 4 or the bass limit is 4, it isn't because it's sustainable. It's because if you don't know when to stop, government will tell you, and that's what a limit represents. If everybody took their limit, we would not be at 4 fish. The limit is 4. So it's part of the whole Creel survey, census, population analysis. But Creel limits aren't limits of safety. It's telling you when it's limits of greed. When you don't know when to stop, we will tell you where to stop. It's 6 or 4 or 10 or whatever it is. Do we really want to be at the point where government has to tell us every possible thing we can and cannot do to be in order to preserve our fish and wildlife?
So are you saying that the 4 fish limit that's imposed on body A, water body A, you're saying that the 4 fish limit that's imposed on that body of water is not based on the fact that that body of water historically draws X number of anglers to it each year, and if each angler were to take their 4 fish limit out of the water, that we'd be okay with our inventory? You're saying that's not the case?
Oh, it isn't the case. I guarantee it isn't the case. We
So-
manage
So if we all took that limit out of that body of water,
every time you went,
collapse.
then you'd quickly be at a 1 fish limit.
So why have we got a 4 fish limit?
Because if you don't know when to stop, I'll tell you it's 4.
Why not a 10? Why not a 1? Like, why 4?
Because if you had it at 10, you'd be at 1 a lot quicker. Remember when I told you, Ange, around Kenora here, we can look on some lakes and count the number of cottages. And if all those cottagers take 1 4-fish limit this year, they're over harvesting. So if they take 4 every time they go out, their fisheries will be what they are. Crappy, really crappy fisheries.
Wow. Man, we got to get
Our problem is we have too much of a good thing. Our problem is we have 400,000 lakes. So we can't manage, we can't have 400,000 regulations for each one of those lakes. If each one of us, heaven forbid, got a bad disease and we went to the hospital, your doctor, your surgeon, your specialist would treat you individually and develop an individual prescription for you. That's the best way to manage a lake as well. But there's 400,000 people. So if we have a surge in coronavirus cases and 400,000 people hit the hospital, they're all going to be treated exactly the same way. If only one person shows up, you're going to get treated a little bit differently.
Huh.
Great analogy. Wow.
Gord, I've always said you're a genius, and you're just proving it right here, time and time again. No matter when you speak, you're like genius. That's it.
I spent a lifetime doing this.
That's why we anointed you the doc, my friend.
That's it.
The doc. We could go on for another, I'd probably only about another 8 or 10 hours or so, guys. But I see that we're running into overtime already.
I have to do my rapid fire on Gordy. Okay, I have to do my rapid fire questions. I might not ever get a chance. Gord, I'm going to ask you a question. This will be fast. There's going to be 1 of 2 answers, and
okay,
1-word answers. So it'll go quick. I don't even have to do it with Ange. So I can do it with Ange another time or whatever. But this will be just quick. Just getting Gordy's. Okay, so Gord Pyzer, ice fishing versus open water.
Open water.
Largemouth bass versus smallmouth bass to fish.
Smallmouth.
Muskie versus pike.
Muskie.
Crappie versus bluegill.
Crappie.
Power fishing versus finesse fishing.
Ooh, wow. Now there's the toughest one yet, Pete.
Thank you.
I have some secret techniques I've showed no one finesse-wise that are unbelievable, but I still love power fishing.
Power over finesse ultimately. Okay, Gordy. If you could only use one of the fishing lines, mono, fluoro, or braid, with no combination thereof, which would you use?
Braid.
Braid. Perfect. My wife asked this question today, and that's a great one. How do you know, this is not a one-worder, this is going to be a quick one. Oh, no, I'll do another one first. Bucktail, musky bucktails, double number 8s or double number 10s?
You know what? 5 years ago, double 10s. This year, now, in fact, I want to do a story double 8s. Everybody's moved to the 10s. In fact, I've even got a title for it, Pete. 8s are great.
Perfect. My wife's question, How do you know what kind of fish are in a lake? This is not a one word, but that's a question. I think it's a great question. So you put that out there. How do you know what kind of fish are in a lake?
I saw an earlier question about oligotrophic, mesotrophic, eutrophic, and what those are, the three different types of lakes. So on the Shield in particular, a Lake Temagami, Lake Nipigon, Lake Nipigon, Lake Simcoe. Those deep lakes, crystal clear, are generally oligotrophic. Ultra clear, very cold. That's telling you likely whitefish, ciscos, lake trout, burbot. Now go to the other extreme, the Rice Lake type, the skugog types, very, very shallow, loads of weeds, lots of reeds, gets a huge algae bloom, warms up in the summer. That's eutrophic. Bluegills, perch, largemouth bass. Now, in between, in the middle, that's the mesotrophic middle lakes. And if they tend towards the oligotrophic side, they can be over that way, or they can be the way towards, they'll be the walleye, perch, smallmouth, largemouth, northern pike, muskies, even a bit of lake trout. And they're the ones in between. So you got oligotrophic on one extreme, crystal clear deep, lake trout, herring, smelt, whitefish, burbot. You go to the other extreme, largemouth, bluegills, pumpkin seeds, and in between can be a bit of anything.
Thank you, sir. And one last quick one here. Why? This is from me again. I'm looking at the screen right now. Why are Angelo and Pete wearing eyeglasses, but Gord is not wearing eyeglasses?
Whoa.
Hey, yes, I knew I did.
You know, I was going to chime in last week because I've had laser surgery too. And when they did my laser surgery, they did my left eye for reading.
He did it,
and my right eye for distance.
He did it.
And your brain doesn't know the difference.
You like that? Does it work for you? Is it good?
It did until now. And I've actually got, because of being in the sun so much, I've actually got a bit of a cataract coming on my left. And I was scheduled to go in and have cataract surgery. And it's likely now been postponed indefinitely because of what's going on.
How long ago did you do that, Gord?
It's now been 20 years. I had the thickest glasses. I had Coke pop bottles for glasses.
Wow. And because Pete and I certainly have been toying with the idea, because our surgery that we had was for distance, right? We got that all looked after and it was great, but we were much younger then. And now as the age thing has crept in, the distance is still okay, but now this is not okay. So I went to see somebody about it. And of course, they said that surgery was available that you had. But because it's a difficult one to adjust to, what they do is give you contact lenses to simulate that one is looking far and one that's looking close. And you wear that for a week. And if you can deal with that, then they'll accept you as a candidate. And I tried and I couldn't do it.
I just could never wear contacts.
Oh boy. Wow.
I just could. So, and
you came out of surgery and that far and close one eye, the other, it didn't bother you, huh?
If they balanced the two, they probably may not have corrected this for as far distance as possible, and they may not. So they balance, but this is definitely. And I never, and it was only if I blinked and closed my. Wow! But your brain never figures it out.
That's awesome. Okay, there you go. You answered my question. Okay.
I want to. What's this great show, guys? Gord, drop knowledge. Keep up the good work. Thanks to Gord for his drop of knowledge. Want to remind everybody that we'll be back on radio tomorrow on the Fan 590 at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, and Gord will be on about 9:35, 9:40 as usual. But an interesting topic tomorrow I've got on the radio show. I've got a professor coming on to talk to us about that murder wasp that's coming into Canada.
Oh, yeah.
Big 2.5 incher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So awful. So he's coming on to talk about that. Of course, we'll talk about all the other usual things. Next Tuesday, Pete and I will be back with the Q&A, and then we'll have another special guest on Friday. Gordy, saying thank you for doing this, it just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem, fitting. I as much as we appreciate this, it's just an awful nice gesture to come on and talk to all the folks and share some of that wealth of knowledge with them. I know you do every day that you go out in the water and every day that you're mingling with people in your circles, but we really appreciate you coming on and doing it with our audience, and they are also your audience as well.
Can I ask Gord, will you do this again with us sometime?
I was going to say, absolutely. I will say this. The greatest pleasure I get is, if I'm not fishing, is doing what we're doing right now. There's never a point of day or night or even when I'm sleeping. The only thing I ever hardly think about is totally fishing. I love doing this, guys. So yeah, a year from now or 6 months from now, let's come back and do it. We could maybe pick a theme: muskies, pike, walleye, bass, whatever. And I don't care. I love doing it.
Thank you, Gord.
And thank you very much. And thank to everybody that joined us today. Great show. And we look forward to speaking with you again next week. Take care. Ciao.
Be good, guys.
Another one over 2 hours.
We're in for some good fishing, feeling easy, feeling free. Yes, we're in for some good fishing, Canada. Come on, leave your worries far behind where they belong, 'cause we're in for some good fishing. Yeah, they just bite naturally. Yes, we're in for some good fishing, Canada. You know I'm in my prime when a fighter's on the line, taking all the strength I've got to reel him in. When I tell the boys back home about the one that got away, they'll be wishing they'd come with us, feeling easy, feeling free. They'll be wishing they'd come fishing in Canada. Yes, we're in for some good fishing, 'cause they just bite naturally. Yes, we're in for some good fishing in Canada.